Kerry, thank you so much for joining us. So, I have a few questions for you. The first one I'd like to ask you is when it comes to podcasting in India, specifically from a PRX perspective, do you all have any thoughts, any plans? What do you think about? How do you see the market sitting over there? The market that we have over here.
Yeah, well, one of the things I feel really is kind of the next growth spurt of podcasting is the global market. And an indicator for us is, as you know, we do a global training program, and every year we get thousands of applications for our training. And every year the applicants are more and more and more experienced. And this year is the first year that we made it a requirement because this is an early stage
Hmm.
training program, and this year we made it a requirement that you had to have at least a full season under your belt. And so the quality of the and the experience, both in terms of monetization, some shows had already really experiment with ad buying, etc. So we had just as many applications, and so that's really a good indicator
Hmm.
of the investment in the content and the growth of the market all over the
Hmm.
world. So that's super exciting. We think that this is an area that we'll continue to keep developing and growing. You and I have talked about training is
Hmm.
one piece, but really the maturity of the acceptance in the ad buying world of like what podcasts can be and what they can do is another one. And then, building community is the third, and how we like really form peer to peer groups around makers, listeners, etc.
Hmm. Cool. I wanted to ask you a little bit again. We're talking to the folks at WPP Brew over here, so I wanted to get a little bit of a sense from you about some of the challenges that you all might have faced in the early days of podcasts, especially when it came to talking to brands about the challenges that exist in the medium. And because I believe that we're in the same spot in India right now that the US was, say, maybe about 10 years ago, before serial came out, before the iPhone was a real thing. I'm seeing similar numbers for shows for networks compared to what you would see back then. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on this, right? How were you back then able to talk to brands and both sides of it, right? How were you able to talk to brands about explaining why you thought podcasts were interesting for them? And from their perspective, why would they invest in a medium like this? What was the value that they would see at that point in time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's funny that I think that for even though podcasting has been around for 20 years in the US, most people kind of mark it as the last 7 or 8 years because that's really when it changed. And for those of us that have been doing this for a long time, um, one of the well, first of all, we had to explain what a podcast was. We don't have to do that anymore. And we had all kinds of ways of doing that. We would say it's like a radio in your pocket. We would make it shorthand, but we always had to explain what it was and why it was important. But lots of great content was happening in digital form, and because we are in radio distribution as well, we started to see that shift. And that was like the first wave of making of a little bit being free from the confines of the radio broadcast and the clock and all of that sort of stuff, but also because you know, the thing about podcasting that's very different than video consumption is that you can hit that play button and you can put your phone in your pocket and you go about your day, whether you're walking your dog or doing the dishes or grocery shopping. Or so it gets integrated very easily, but it's intimate nonetheless. It's not like you're distracted because it's in your mostly on headphones. And so the share of ear that we were able to collect in those early days, which was really individual sponsors loving individual
Hmm.
shows. Like that was our first entry point, which is that fans of our shows were working at ad agencies and like, how do we get into this?
Right.
We love this show, so other people may love this show. So really, the content is the best open door that we have. Like just great stories and great content, great conversation.
Okay. So I that you mentioned, like, the content being a good way for advertisers to kind of sample and come in from that. So to kind of jump on that, or to kind of follow up from that, right? What kind of content, what kind of like, I mean, like PRX has made some of the best shows that people that are out there, right? I know that Radiotopia and 99% Invisible are no longer there, but they were like, started up at PRX. Besides that, This American Life, you all have
Yeah.
uh
The
s-
Moth,
yeah,
yes,
a
yes,
Song
yeah,
Exploder, West Wing Weekly, which is one of my favorites. But so
yeah,
many of
good.
these different shows that are there. How do y'all look at content? What are some of the lessons that you think are there broadly to learn from the kind of content that works for listeners also, but also works for brand integrations or works well with brands?
Yeah. Well, in Radiotopia is really a great example of unbelievable success, and it's still successful over all these years. And one of the gambles we took on Radiotopia is that at that time, like 2014, when we launched it, most podcast networks were topically aligned.
Mhm,
So you would have like a sports network, or you would have a technical
mhm,
network, or something like that. And for Radiotopia, we thought, what if the connective tissue was just creative?
mhm,
What if it's just creativity? Could that be successful? And so we weren't quite sure, but what we learned very quickly is that um, people were very compelled to support individuals making content. Like that's one of the powers of podcasting, is that you can have little media companies everywhere. And so but one of the things about shows like 99% Invisible, and I think this is why they lend themselves so well for
mhm,
brands, is that to be successful in podcasting, you have to be very specific of who your core audience
mhm,
is. Even if you have a general appeal show, you have to get that core audience right. And in the early days of 99% Invisible, that was a show that was made for architects,
right.
just period. And then it grew out so that he made it so that it was appealing to lots of other people. And when he made that shift from just the architects to the wider audience, well, then you can like play with those edges
Mhm,
a lot more. And then brands that are in the creative space, Adobe, like brands like that, they can really find a way to get to connect with those
mhm,
listeners. And and in the early days of podcasting, Squarespace, Mailchimp, those kind of brands, those were they were taking risks on
mhm.
podcasts, and it put them on the map. It put them on the map because they were taking a risk on a new medium, and everybody was using their
Mhm.
products because their products were also aligned with podcasting and digital media.
Do you have a sense that there are certain types of products, especially in the early days, as you will, because again, we're trying to lay
Yeah,
parallels in that sense, right? Do you have a sense that there are certain kinds of products or certain categories that work better for podcasting when before you hit the kinds of scales that are now visible in the U.S.?
yeah. Yeah, I think in those early days, the direct response advertisers were that's absolutely the biggest
Hmm.
category. But they have a lifespan.
Right.
They kind of blanket the market, and then they kind of move on to other things. So there's direct response, mostly mostly it has to do with the
Hmm.
demographics. There's the biggest listening audience is between 18 and
Hmm.
35, and so that is a group of people who live online. So online products and sales and services, like that all is the kind of closest aligned. But nowadays that's not true anymore,
Hmm.
because now there's Toyota, there's Progressive
Right.
Insurance. Now podcasting has tipped over. We For us in the US, when adoption crosses over kind of 50% of the population say that they've listened to a podcast at least
Right.
once, that's a marker for us.
Right.
And then it goes a lot quicker. And then the brands wake up. Big brands that don't have tracking, like you don't have a code when you order a car.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
just the brand awareness. So those ones, they usually do not. They're not usually first movers
Hmm.
into a new medium, but they're super successful
Right.
now.
Interesting. So one of the things that we've noticed, right, as time has gone on, so we still, I would say that our audience for us still does skew slightly affluent, not slightly, fairly affluent,
Yeah.
but the skew
Yeah.
is decreasing. Where it was initially a couple of years ago, 2, 3, 4 years ago, when we would do our audience surveys and stuff like that, what we would see in terms of where they were relative to the general income levels. But we do see that flattening. How do you think that plays out in? We've seen that in the U.S. as well. We've seen that here as well. What do you think are what kind of effects did that have on the way on the way brands would interact or market different podcasts?
Yeah, one of the ways that we think about this. So I just want to give a nod to the research that you've
Hmm.
done, and I hope that there is a real gap in the international podcast marketplace of data.
Hmm.
So I'm really glad that you have been doing some. And what we do is we think about what are our other indicators, and so we do audience surveys like you do, and so that becomes very valuable because the people that even agree to do a survey gives you an indicator. So the one of the metrics of engagement is just how many people actually do the
Hmm.
survey. Like if that's, you know, kind of 0.5%, you're already doing pretty
Right.
well given the size of the audience versus. So like all of those little indicators, and for us, we raise donations for
Hmm.
our shows. And so that became another interesting because when people will part with their charitable giving dollars to a show, what we learned is that the entry points for those donations was really low. So we knew that while like it's also true for us that the income skew is a little bit higher, college educated for many of our shows, but it is also true that we had a lot of fans who just loved what we were doing and would show us that love with single dollars, like little tiny donations. And that's actually the thing that inspires us the most because that's when you can find advertisers that really kind of span both of those things. That it's not just a product for the haves;
Right.
it's a product for everybody.
Awesome. So I have a couple of more things before I let you go. One thing I want to
Yeah.
ask you was the impact of technology, specifically auto insertion, right? We spoke a little bit about this before we started this thing, and I think that would
Hmm.
be very helpful for this audience to kind of get your perspective on like inserting ads and how that changes the landscape of what's available rather than just like, the hard inserted into the content piece, right?
Oh, the yes, that when we started podcasting, the advertising spots were literally edited in, you know, and hosts would be doing their scripts and like going into the ads right away with the same music, et cetera, under them. They were very difficult to edit out. We often had like some advertisers had like spots that had a coupon code that would be out of date. Users would go and try and use it and it would be wouldn't work. That created customer service problems. So the ad injection, the dynamic ad insertion of today solved a lot of things. It made the content more timely, made the content more relevant. You can go back and update stories. You can go back. For us, we think of this technology as a way to do messaging.
Mhm.
So, and I'll give you an example. Like for one of our shows, The Moth, if we were to do a live Moth show in London, you don't want to sell tickets for that
Right.
in Los Angeles. You just want people in London to hear that they can go to a
Hmm.
show. And so it allowed us to use the inventory management much better. We could also use technology to say, okay, this sponsor doesn't want to be in the same episode with that sponsor
Hmm.
because their products are kind of similar. So it allowed us to have a real brain
Hmm.
power and let the technology move these little pieces in and out and in and out. And I think the that that the ad market has responded by going up considerably
Right.
in podcasting. It was one of the reasons why we don't have to explain what podcasts are anymore because of dynamic ad insertion. And there's still a lot of work to do. There's still privacy concerns. There's still you can get you can overdo the floodgates.
Uh-huh.
You can open up those floodgates too much. I still think that one of the powerful things about podcasting is its
Hmm.
intimacy, and if you compromise that, I don't think the ads are as
Hmm.
effective. So I do think that there's this very important balance of matching good ad with the appropriate content over and over and over.
So I hear what you're saying, right? But I wanted to just like as a follow up on this piece, right? How do we address the concerns that brands often have, legitimately so, around delivery of advertising, even if it is right? Because again, one of the challenges in podcasting from a technical perspective is given the RSS based infrastructure. All you know is that a file has been downloaded. You don't know the degree of consumption, right? And if we're doing inserted ads, that in some cases exacerbates those worries. How would you address those worries if you were in my position?
Yeah, yeah, we face this all the time, and it's true. Like the only data that we get on consumption is really if the file has been downloaded. So there's a couple ways that we deal with this. One is we have pixel trackers along the
Hmm.
podcast, so we know for sure that it's been downloaded. One of the Because Apple has so much of the listening
Hmm.
audience, one of the protections that Apple does is if you haven't listened to 5 episodes, they stop downloading
Right.
automatically. So in some ways, that's a good way to protect against like hundreds of episodes being downloaded but not
Hmm.
listened to. So, and for Apple, that's five, and for other platforms, you have to physically hit that play
Right.
button because the subscriptions are kind of changed. That whole habit is changing. So we feel pretty comfortable that the ratio of download to listening actually still remains pretty high,
Hmm.
and that's backed up by the Edison
Hmm.
research on the all of the data that we get from them, our own surveys,
Arts too.
and then our pixel track. Yeah, yeah, our pixel trackers, and then also just the performance of the
Hmm.
ads still remains very
That's
high,
true.
and that for us that's evidence because we have happy customers that renew
Hmm.
and keep staying in our products. One of the things that we're wrestling with now in the US is that because podcasting has grown so much and there's so many options, 2 million podcasts, I think for agencies that are representing buyers, it's not always it's great for the industry to grow really fast, but it's not great for those buyers if their only choice are big, massive
Hmm.
podcasts because they get lost in there. So what we represent is premium content that is really tied to whether topically or just because people want to be associated with creative brands, etc. And so the good news for us, even though you know there's big buys going on with low CPMs. The good news for us is that a lot of agencies are actually looking to cut through the noise, and you cut through the noise by having a creative partner
Right.
who's willing to say, "Why don't we try this? Why don't we experiment with that? Here's our creative messaging," and that's really the stuff that works. It's really the stuff that there's so much data out there that supports that blanketing the ad market with just you know standard ads that don't have any personality are no more effective.
Right.
They just are bigger budgets, and so we still that's the world that we live in is really the premium.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question for you right now. Thank you
Yeah.
again so much for doing this for us. Uh,
Oh yeah. I hope this is helpful to what you're wrestling
I,
with and
I, I
and growing
I
industry.
can't believe that it isn't. I mean, like, and this has to do with like So my last question is that you've been observing podcasting as a space, right? And for like, I mean, like, you're one of the people who has grown this space, right? I mean, like, I
Yeah.
was checking your LinkedIn right now, and you've been at PRX for 20 years. That is
Yeah.
amazing to me, right? And so I just,
Yeah. Yeah.
given your front row seat to the space over its growth, right? Where do you see it going? What do you see as the future? How do you, and
Mhm.
also maybe even if you could speak a little bit to the evolution, right, from day one to today, if that's something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about the evolution a lot, because in those early days, it was, well, in the very early days, it was really only technologists who were really going through all the hoops to either consume or make podcasts. As you mentioned, kind of the iPhone coming out was another a moment in podcasting. And then after that, Apple's decision to put the podcast app as part of the operating system of the phone, as opposed to just an app on the phone, was really that was when friction really reduced technologically. And like now we're in this acquisitions and consolidation, that hasn't happened in other parts of the world, but it's really happening here. And then, of course, when any industry consolidates like that, then there's like a settling. And one of the things that's so amazing about podcasting is it's more like the internet than it is like radio, even though, because it's audio, people combine audio like broadcast and podcast. But really, the structure and the distribution of podcasting is much more like the internet. And so, therefore, we have not heard the best of audio yet. I mean, there's just so much opportunity. First of all, there's places and people like you who are investing in this space and really growing it with great stories and great content. So that's like the international market is absolutely. There's the use of smart speakers. The option. Like, think about what I was saying earlier about dynamic ad insertion. Think about if you could pick your own ending of certain fiction stories. You can use smart speakers to interact with audio. There's this, like, there's so much, like, kids podcasts, interactive bedtime stories. Like, you can imagine all kinds of very cool things. So I'm excited about. I don't think we've seen the best of the creative outlet. The technology and the ad product is absolutely maturing, and that's really good for all of us because that's what funds everything. And now we have, I don't know if this is true in India, but it is true here, which is we have like this slice of the market that's now paid subscriptions where you pay to not get ads. Like, and that is where the income thing really does come into
Right.
play. We still think it's going to be a small sliver, but it's steady income,
Yeah.
so it's good for content
No,
makers.
I agree. I think
I'm very bullish about where it's going, and I think the technology just gets better.
I agree for sure. One interesting tidbit, since you mentioned the smart speakers so much, and again, we're going to be presenting this review or this report later today to the same audience.
Yeah.
So we actually found that the audience consuming via smart speakers like the Alexa or the Apple Home speaker, more than the number of people listening to a car in India.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
I
That's really
it
great.
was it was a very surprising finding, but it's one of the things that we've seen come out
Yeah.
of this. But
It's the thing that held podcasting back, which is what smart speakers kind of solve, which is like the radio is like the
mhm,
simplest, like push a button, it plays. So if you can match the power of choice
mhm.
with the simplicity of like a single action, it's another one of those perfect storms to kind of really push an industry forward. And we've had really happy relationships with brands over many many
Mhm.
years who are really, they really feel like they are, for us, we create long-term partnerships. That's really what we want to see. And for agencies and buyers who want to know about podcasting, their fans themselves, that's really going to drive a lot of growth.
Thank you so much, Carrie. This was wonderful, and
Yeah, thank you for your interest, and I love seeing you. It's been a while. I hope we get to see each other in person sometime
I
soon.
hope so too.